Once upon a Halloween night, not too spooky, not too still, there was a whisper in the air, softer than a sigh, and a small ghost who had a very big problem. He'd forgotten how to boo. Now, you might think every ghost knows how to do it. You might even practice one yourself right now, just to be sure your voice still works. But poor little Pip, floating through the candlelit corridors of Willowmere Hollow, had lost his ghostly woo. Every October, the ghosts of the Hollow gathered for the moonlight haunting parade, a shimmering, silver procession of every ghoul and giggling shade that danced between worlds for one night only. It was their most important night of the year, and every ghost had to give at least one good, proud boo. It was their way of saying, "We still remember you, the living who dream, the dreamers who live." But Pip's boo had vanished like breath on a frosty window. And this Halloween, if he couldn't find it, he'd have to sit out the parade, alone in the attic of the old manor house, listening to the music of everyone else's courage. And so begins our tale of one small ghost and the biggest sound of all, the sound of belonging. The ghost who forgot to boo, a gentle Halloween fairy tale of courage and kindness. Welcome to Magic Fairy Tales TV, where bedtime becomes magical. Let's open tonight's enchanted chapter. Once upon an October evening, when the maples along the river glow had loosened their last golden coins, and the moon rose like a clean silver bowl over Everhollow, there lived a little ghost named Wisp. He was smaller than the sigh of an old blanket, and lighter than the steam that shivered off hot cider. He drifted between chimneys and over slate roofs, his pale form a touch of fog against the warm lamplight. Wisp knew the rituals of ghosts. He knew which chimneys led to the jolliest of kitchens, and which attic windows were lined with forgotten toys. He knew how to slip through keyholes, and how to rattle an old iron gate just enough to startle a brave cat. But when the nights grew crisp, with the promise of Halloween, and the great bell of the old tower tolled for the annual boo parade, Wisp felt a type of tremor that lived in his chest. Boo, the other ghosts practiced in the tower's great echoing hall. Some were round, rolling sounds that shook dust from rafters. Others were thin and high as a wind chime, perfect for making the bravest child glance over their shoulder. There was Marrow, a ghost the size of a bonnet, who could make a morning rooster tumble backward with a single thunderous boo. There was Lark, who preferred soft whistles that curled like steam around a teacup. They watched Wisp folding his hands of vapor and trying to pull a sound out of the space between his ribs. "Try again," they urged, their voices rippling like linen. "Every ghost must do their boo. It's what keeps tradition. It's how the living remember us." Their words had the casual cruelty of a wind, cutting through still water. Wisp tried. He puffed his breath, he tightened his little ghostly chest, and all that came was a sound like the last page of a book sliding closed, a soft, modest sigh. The sigh made a moth tumble. It fluttered a curtain, but it did not make the bravest child leap or the oldest dog howl. When Wisp's sigh escaped, some of the older spirits chuckled in the manner of dry leaves. "A ghost who sighs," Marrow announced with a hollow cackle. "We have a poet among us." The laughter felt like cold rain to Wisp. He had never wished to frighten, he had never meant to be different. Once, before his forgetting and before his soft self had learned to take up the spare places of shadow, a single memory lived in him. A woman's, hand placed on the shoulder of a crying child, and the hush that followed, less a fright than a comfort. He wanted to be like that. That season, the harvest moon burned fuller and more generous than it had in many years. Villagers hung lanterns on posts and threaded garlands across doorways. The pumpkin patch by the eastern field was especially grateful, in the way a patch can be for rain and sun, and the children of Everhollow came to spend afternoons picking heirloom pumpkins for carving. It was there, among hollow vines and speckled squash, that the world arranged an answer for what Wisp did not yet know he would need. Clara lived at the far end of the lane, beneath a thatched eave stitched by hands that once knew lace and song. Her father had been a cooper, and her mother had been the kind of woman who hummed morning into existence by folding bread. When the winter of the year before had been more hungry than the town expected, Clara's family lost not only harvest but habit. Bread turned to crusts of memory, and song thinned to hum. Her mother, soft with worry, began to go into the garden later each morning, searching for any treasure the season was willing to hide. On the edge of the patch, after the sun had dipped and the children had trooped home, Clara sat on a stump, chin in her hands, and watched as the other children made lanterns that would outshine the stars. Her hands were empty of the things that make holidays feel whole. There were no pumpkins with proud smiles. There were no ribbons to crown. When she slid a thumb across her cheek, she felt the salt of wanting. Wisp saw her. He had flitted through the night like a leaf, drawn by the small tightness in Clara's chest, not an angry hunger, but a deep, quiet wanting. He hovered at the edge of the field, not daring to step into the light. He had watched other ghosts perform, how they delighted in the sudden jolt of frightened gullibility, and Wisp had tried to replicate the glee he saw reflected on faces. The problem was, after the laughter, when the living found their courage again, he found something else. A hush. Not of fear, but of relief. Not the kind of shattering that made stories remember you, but the mending kind that healed hems and patched hearts. Wisp felt, in that too small place under his ribs of mist, the urge to do that mending. He drifted close to Clara, and for the first time he tried to speak, not to startle, but to soothe. He let out a faint gust that carried the smell of cold apples and the memory of a lullaby. Clara shivered and smiled before she understood why. She cupped her hands and wished aloud, the way children have always done since the first story. I wish our table will have pumpkins for pies. I wish Mama won't be so tired. The words flew like paper boats into the dusk. Wisp felt something in those wishes tremble. They were small, honest, and wide with faith. He wanted to answer. He wanted, for the first time in his still new afterness, to be a helper rather than a haunter. He drifted into the ranks of the pumpkins. He blew his soft sigh across the withered stems, and as a ghost might when trying something brave, he poured his whole care into those fragile vines. Frost traced the edges of leaves like lace. Dew arranged itself in a constellation on a plump gourd. By dawn, the pumpkins looked as if a kindly moon had touched them, all swelling with perfect orange. When Clara found them, her gasp of joy made Wisp glow. She ran back to the village with her arms full, and in the warm kitchen that night, the family ate of pie and light. The villagers set candles by the window, and for a moment, the whole town felt stitched together again. Word travelled fast in a place where fireplaces carry gossip as well as warmth. A kind ghost, the baker whispered into his bread, a kindly one. The children left doors a little ajar and candles on sills. If a ghost could do kindness, perhaps kindness could do more. Wisp became, that year, a secret name for comfort. Night after night, a flicker of blue light would arrange small mercies. A lost glove returned to a child's hand. A teapot warmed to a perfect simmer without any human's notice. A banging shutter untied from the wind. Yet, not every spirit was moved by those changes. In the tower, among the old bones of ritual, Marrow's shadow spread like a fault line. Wisp is weakening us, he said, puffing gusts of frost that clung to the stones. We have a calling rooted in the old agreements. We are seen when we leave a tremor in the heart. We vanish if we make the living too comfortable. The great debate split the tower like a cracked bell. Tradition, intoned Marrow. Function, hummed Lark. Effect, whispered others. It was in the midst of this argument that the keeper of old ways, so ancient that he kept the skeleton of a wreath in one spindle, called Wisp forward. Why do you sigh like a window? He asked, startlingly blunt. We are the shiver in a child's spine. We are the gust that lifts the hair at the nape of a neck. What use is a ghost who gives bread instead of a scream? Wisp looked at the keeper, and then at the faces that had stared at him over the years. He had no answer that the tower wanted to hear. He only had the truth that had lodged under his vaporous ribs. Because it feels better to me to help, he said simply. Because I think something that comforts can still keep stories alive. Because I want the living to remember us kindly. Marrow's laugh was a wind that rattled the rafters. The keeper's eyes, two hollowed moons, narrowed. You are soft. Softness is not a ghost's armor. Softness is not enough. So the tower voted, a small, ancient council with the weight of the years behind it, and decided that Wisp must prove his worth. He was to perform a boo so true and perfect that no human could misinterpret it. If he failed, he would be consigned to the shadow row, to drift among old shoe forms and forgotten toys, never to cross a warm threshold again. Wisp's fear was not of being alone, but of failing those he had already warmed. If he lost the right to cross the threshold, how would he return to Clara's kitchen, or the baker's oven, or the small lit porch where old Mrs. Alder knitted socks for stormy nights? He trembled like a lantern in a gust, but he did not cower. Some courage arrives not as a storm, but as a small, steady light. The night of the great boo arrived with an aurora of fireflies. The town below hung lanterns of carved smiles. Children in capes practiced sneaking past bushes and shouting partners of mock fear. Wisp lined up with the rest and felt the pressure of expectation coil about him like a hand. Marrow raised his head and led the parade down the hill. They drifted between houses, through alleys, and past the mill pond, where the reeds listened and the cattails shivered. Wisp watched the faces of the living. He watched for the loosening of breath at the unexpected clatter, or the closing of a door at a sound too sharp. He remembered Clara's laugh and the grateful hum of the baker. How could he make a sound that did not startle and yet did not erase, that would honor the old ways and remain true to the small kindness that had become his? When his turn came, he shaped his breath into something he had never tried before. He thought of every warm light he had seen, every returned mitten, every small mercy. He gathered that memory and pushed it outward, not to make a child skitter and stumble, but to make a child remember the feeling of being safe at the center of a storm. He made a sound. It was a boo, and yet it held the hush of a hand laid over a frightened heart. It was the sound of a lullaby wrapped in a gust of autumn leaves. It was, in the ears of everyone who heard it, not a command to flee, but an invitation to remember. The village paused. Dogs turned, but did not bark. Children blinked, then smiled. Marrow's jaw tightened. He expected howls and tumbling crates. The keeper of old ways looked as if a cold breeze had shifted. For a breath, nothing moved. Then small hands ran to windowsills to see from behind drawn curtains. Old men in their beds exhaled. A child who had feared the dark let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Wisp's heart, if a ghost can claim such a thing, swelled. He had not broken the tower's law. He had fulfilled it in a way the tower had not imagined. Because sometimes the job of a spirit is not only to remind the living of the thin veil, but to show them the warmth on the other side. When the parade reached the square, Marrow hovered before Wisp. He could have declared victory. He could have thrown the smallest of condemnations. Instead, he did something that surprised even the youngest of ghosts. He bowed, not the mocking tilt of times past, but a real, careful incline. "There are many ways to be remembered," Marrow said, and there was a crack in the old voice where something like respect slipped through. "Tonight you reminded us that there are stories that keep us near, not by fear, but by love." Wisp watched as Marrow drifted away, the old keepers trailing behind. The tower's candlelight seemed less harsh, as if some great pressure had eased. That night, Everhollow slept the sleep of those whose bones are mended by the day. Clara tucked her small sister into bed and kissed her brow, feeling in the quiet the echo of a soft boo like a promise. Wisp glided to the edge of the roof and looked down upon the village. He could not name what we call triumph, but he knew this. He had found a way to be. He had found a way to let stories keep him, not by frightening, but by doing small mercies. And when the years later brought new children to Everhollow and new nights for ghosts to practice, sometimes a tiny sigh would slip through when someone needed it most. And when they told the story to their own children, they would laugh and say, "That's the boo Wisp taught us. Gentle, true, and bright as a lantern." The tower's tradition adapted, not by abandoning its past, but by remembering that stories were living things. They grew or they withered, depending on the hands that told them. Wisp had, in the quietness of his heart, made a new kind of legend, one where being small and kind could change the way fear was taught. And if, on some October night, you find a soft light leading you home, and you think you hear a little voice in the leaves say boo with a hug in it, know that Wisp keeps a corner of the world safe, one gentle boo at a time. The change in Everhollow did not come without ripples. Lives are tied together, not only by bread and by song, but by expectation and the small rituals that pass from mouth to ear. With Wisp's new way, people began to alter how they celebrated the nights. Children left not only doors open, but letters tucked into jars, notes of thanks for small mercies. They began to place tiny wooden toys on sills for the spirits who helped them. At first, it was simply a kindness exchange. But kindness breeds curiosity, and curiosity is an animal that has teeth. Once a child leaves a note for a ghost, they also leave instructions for the future. Keep the light, keep the gift, keep the tales that taught the lesson. One autumn, a travelling show came to Everhollow. Tall wagons painted like the sky, drums that could mimic rain, and a ringmaster with a smile like a razor. He called himself Master Garin, and he had a voice that could sell mornings. There were tricks and mirrors, and with the show came bright paper posters promising to teach children to capture the unseen and bottle ore. His act included a glassy sphere, clever as a pocket watch, which he claimed could hold a sound, a laugh, a sob, a terrible roar. People are not always wise about things that glimmer. They lined up and pressed coins into Garen's gloved hand. The children giggled. The elders watched with measured interest. Master Garen, with a tilt and a wink, said he could sell any memory and any moment to those who wished for proof of the other world. Wisp felt something thin away inside him. It was as if a strand of his very being had been pulled through the glass and stitched into a new pattern that belonged to no night and no hearth. He trembled and tried to gather himself, and in that moment became aware of the others, of the new ghosts who had come because of Garen's promise. They clustered near the tower's eaves, their forms smaller by degrees, like candles that had been moved under glass. The keeper of old ways felt the theft as if it were a chill through his bones. He walked to Garen and demanded the glass be opened. Garen, flattered by his own cleverness, allowed the crowd to surge nearer. Why not, when marvel profits could be counted? But the glass had taken a cost. The captured sound did not return. It had been flayed thin by being shown in the daylight. The original voice, the thing that once warmed Clara's kitchen, had been scaled down to a shadow of itself. People clapped and gaped because the newness of the spectacle dazzled them. But there is a difference between wonder and warmth, between the curious eye and the return of a true comfort. The keeper's face was a gathering storm. He called a council, and the tower decided they would take action. That action came to Wisp in a night of frost, when he could hardly move for the heaviness in his core. He had given away the first true laughter he had ever stolen, given in the only way a ghost could be given to another. A sound, given up like a peeled apple. Wisp floated into the dark and found the glass, lying near Garen's wagon, and the ringmaster snoring like a human who has eaten too much pomp. The glass glowed with the stolen sound, blue and thin as a winter pond. Wisp did not know all that ghosts know. He did not know how to smash glass or how to bargain with a sleeping man, but he knew this. A sound's home was not to be shown like a thing. He wanted back the laugh, the crackle of warmth. He wanted Clara's kitchen to smell like home again. He pressed his little mist against the glass and felt the cold of it. He murmured the small spell that lives in the throat of every helper. Not a shout, not a snarl, but a petition. The glass shivered. Something inside answered, less a voice than an awareness, like the sigh of a net being tugged. A sound pushed back. But at that moment the wagon's wheels ground. Garen shifted in his sleep, and the glass spun across the boards and rolled toward the edge of the plank. Wisp caught the ghost of the sound with his maw, all but could not hold it in the human world's rules. The glass tipped. The sound burst out like a spring, cracking a frozen lake, and splashed across the open night. Every song that had been captured, the laugh, the small boos, the hum of the baker's oven, scattered into the air like butterflies, escaping the glass's appetite. The sound struck rooftops, chimneys, and pans. It found sleeping hearts and warmed them as it fell. But wherever those notes found a new home, they were not exactly like before. Some were brightened by the experience, some were frayed, and some folded into new shapes. Garen woke, wild and furious, and demanded restitution. The townsfolk, half enchanted, half confused, bellowed for a spectacle. Garen, seeing his profits flown away, became a man with a vendetta. The tower convened, and the keeper whispered, the balance between the worlds had been rattled. A human whose hunger is for wonder and not for mending cannot be allowed to traffic in the living music of the nights. But the keeper's voice trembled with another truth. The living had changed. They had chosen to leave notes and gifts for the spirits. They had invited care. That invitation must be honored. Wisp, for all his smallness, had become a fulcrum in a story older than the tower. He had shown it possible that spirits might mend and not only mark. He had taught a village to believe in gentle things, and in the ruckus of Garen's greed, had put into motion a choice the town had to make. Wisp watched Garen from the shadow of a lamppost. His little heart knotted. The idea that a human could bottle courage or trap a ghost's voice made him ache. He had not thought his work valuable in that way. He only wanted to help. But seeing the glass sphere, how the ringmaster wound it and cupped it to his ear, Wisp felt a tremor. Less of fear than of warning. Garen's act grew bolder. He visited the tower one evening, or rather he stalled beneath it with a troop of lanterns and a most curious salesman's ladder of arguments. He offered to buy a boo, a unique fun, he called it. For the right price, a spectre can be turned into a marvel and sold to the curious. We will exhibit wonders to the capital. Think, tickets, praise, coin. Most of the tower laughed outright at the stallion-faced man. Why would we barter what is ours? Marrow wrenched his shoulders like a curtain. We are not toys. The keeper of old ways sniffed and turned his nose up at the idea that a human could monetize a ghost. But there were other ghosts, newer, smaller, who found the idea of being noticed by a world that counted treasure alluring. Wisp watched the younger spirits press toward Garen's brazen smile. He saw how their mist might be sought for applause rather than woven into the night's music. Little by little, a fissure of temptation opened. A single ghost took the master's coin in secret and borrowed the ringmaster's glass. The glass, Garen explained, had a hunger. Once a sound was placed inside it, it awakened a deeper appetite. It did not merely hold, it took. The first voice put in, a light laugh, thinned with each viewing of the glass. Applause for the spectacle dimmed the ghost inside, and the glass grew a sheen like oil. Before long, the laugh lost its original warmth and became only a thing to gawk at. Wisp watched this erosion, and it made him small with sorrow. He thought of Clara's laughter, his first light, the way bread tasted warmer when someone found their way home. The demons of commerce eat the edges of meaning. He had seen it in the way villagers began to prefer the flash of Garen's mirror to the slow mending of a stitched shirt. One night, Garen decided he wanted something rarer than the common laugh. He desired a proper boo. He wanted the tower's bells to ring, and for a true ghost sound to be placed in his glass for all to gape at. He tried to buy one from Marrow, and was spat upon. He tried to charm the keeper, who smelled his coin and shrugged. But Garen was patient as fog and sharp as a coin's edge. It was then he found a whisper at the market. A ghost who did things differently, who made pumpkins bloom and returned mittens. The ringmaster's eyes glittered. He followed the rumor like a hawk. When Garen approached Wisp, he did not bring chain or clamor. He brought a promise. "Little one," he said in a tone that smelled of cinnamon and thunder, "I will make you famous. I will give you a name that will glow in the lantern light forever. People will line to see your boo, and they will pay for the pleasure. Think of the children you can help. Think of the golden coins that could fill your village's empty coffers. You have done much. This could do so much more." Wisp felt the pull of good intention at the edge of his chest. He saw, for a blind flash, Clara's table so full the whole town would taste the difference. He saw the baker's ovens always warm. He imagined the soft, honest gratitude that would follow. Yet, in the heart of the offer was a better word for a trap. Trade. He remembered Marrow's warning about softness, and the keeper's argument that the world must be held to its old shapes. He remembered the way certain things die when we pin them like butterflies. Their color dims, their secret wings crumble. Wisp said no. Garen's smile thinned to a blade. "Then I suppose I will have to take it," he whispered, and held up the glass. The sphere's skin shimmered as if it knew the weight of a thing about to be captured. It happened quickly, an old trick, used by clever men for as long as storytelling had teeth. Garen clicked the glass and called for demonstration. The crowd leaned forward. Wisp did not want to be clever now. He wanted only to keep what had been given in trust. He made his softest sound, an echo of Clara's grateful laugh, of slippers on a wooden floor, of a mother's hum. and Garin snapped the glass shut. The sphere drank the sound like a thirsty thing, and then, to everyone's astonishment, the applause began. First weak, then loud. Garin's pockets jingled. The ringmaster grinned until the light seemed to catch in his teeth like coins. On the night Garin left, his wagons half empty of wonder but full of bruised pride, he did not take his apology. He took a vow to return with cleverer traps. Everhollow settled back, more careful now, but also more aware, that some marvel is not to be hoarded, that the best things sometimes come in sighs that hug the edges of a child's laughter rather than tear them open. Wisp melted into the fog that night, and though he felt the loss of the stolen music, he was warmed by the knowledge of what had been saved. Listening, he heard Clara's small voice calling the family to supper. He kept his place on that rooftop, a small lamp in the vastness, and he learned this deeper truth. There is bravery in keeping, and there is danger in selling what ought to remain open. He would learn more about the cost of being different. He would have to stand up to a ringmaster with promises that glitter as easily as ice. But he would not stand alone. Wisp had lit small lights in the hearts of the living, and, as every old tale discovers, light attracts other lights. The final conflict arrived, in the small way many great things do, quietly and then all at once. Master Garin, stung by embarrassment and empty pockets, returned to Everhollow with new props, mirrors to multiply a single grin into a small constellation, and a peculiar silver net that glittered with the sound of coin. He promised wonders even the stars had never seen. He promised to make every visitor remember why the world should pay for marvel. The villagers listened at first, as they always had to callings that smelled of ease. A few were seduced. A few clutched their small coins and handed them over. Wisp watched the town's slowly widening hunger and knew the danger. He felt, suddenly, the truth of the keeper's warning. If the living learned to collect wonder like trophies, they would stop living inside it. But he also knew another thing. If the spirits insisted on only being fearsome, they would be left to the elder's attic, dusty and unvisited. So when Garin announced the great bargain, "Bring me your smallest marvels and I will show you the world," Wisp did something no other ghost had done. He slipped into the open tent as the crowd gazed and found Garin's little silver net glinting above a tray of coins. It was shaped to catch a breeze and a gasp. Wisp approached quietly, and where he might have stolen or shrieked, he spoke instead. He sounded into the net a small memory of Clara's hand on her mother's shoulder, a biscuit fresh from the oven, the contented thump of a child's heart after a story. He poured his essence into those images and pushed them outward like a gift. But Garin's net was a cunning thing. It did not preserve warmth. It preserved spectacle. The memory that had been a soft feast became a glossy, hard jewel. The crowd gasped and applauded. Garin held a carved marvel aloft like a trophy. He looked at Wisp, and for the briefest of seconds the ringmaster's face cleared. The child struck part of him, the shard that loved stories for the sake of their warmth, flickered. Then, as if a sneeze had knocked a tower of fine glass, the jewel cracked under the weight of applause. Garin's contraptions began to fail. Mirrors fogged and threw back uglier versions of faces. The net, overloaded with contrived delight, snapped and released the stolen small mercies. They flew, a scattered constellation, finding homes not in a treasure chest, but in pockets and kitchens and under pillows. Applause like rain fell through the town. Garin, exposed, saw that he had been given neither the gratitude he coveted nor the kindness he'd promised. People in the crowd, seeing the rawness returned, began to cry out, not in anger, but in a sudden recognition. The old keeper's lessons, the tower's stories, the village's quiet charity, they were woven together. Garin packed his wagons, stealing away with his mirrors that reflected only the hollowness of applause, and left behind, on the muddy road, a trail of couponed promises. The town lost some coins, the loss of which made them think harder about generosity. They kept their candles a little closer at night and thanked, openly, the small spirits who had always given them more than fright. Wisp, for his part, was neither elevated nor locked away. He was, if anything, accepted. He continued to do small mercies, a lost shoe found by the river, a map rerouted to a child who had walked too far, a lullaby carried into a house where a widow sat rubbing her hands for warmth. One winter, when the snow lay soft as a benediction, Clara's mother fell ill with a fever that burned. The family's money had been spent on times when such tragedies visit small households. A doctor came and shook his head. Clara, kneeling by the bedside, wondered what more could be done. Wisp hovered near. He could scour the town for coin or trick Garin out of his pockets, but he had learned from wise elders that mending is sometimes not made from gold, but from other wild things. He stood at the foot of the bed and made a sound. It was no longer a try at a boo. It had become a particular tone born from the shape of a moment of shared bread. He remembered the baker passing him a small crust years before, and how that simple act had felt like a coin of warmth. Wisp breathed the memory into the air over the mother's chest. The room warmed like an oven. The mother's brow eased. People in the town remembered then why they had begun to leave candles at sills and little wooden toys. They remembered the art of being small and steady. They knitted together food and help and song for Clara's family. Wisp learned that his shape, small and soft, had a place in this balancing act, at the seam between the mortal need and the spectral nudge. Years passed, as they do. Children grew to be adults who told the story of a ghost who turned pumpkins plump, and a ringmaster who learned not to take everything that glimmered. The tower, older and wiser, altered its rituals. The keeper of old ways wrote a marginal note into the tower's ledger. Remember that a ghost may keep a home as well as raise a roof of fright. Clara grew and married a cobbler with hands as honest as the river, and she bore a son with his mother's laugh. On the 3rd October, after the first harvest, Wisp helped. The boy made him a small lantern fashioned from a jar and a scrap of amber cloth. He hung it in his window every fall. It gave the village something to look forward to, a kind tick on the calendar. One evening, the boy, grown now and with a child on his knee, sat beneath the tower and asked if ghosts were only things to fear. "No," said the keeper, who had learned to adjust his temper like a worn bell. "They are also the quiet that teaches us how to listen." He nodded toward the sky, where a thin light moved like a punctuation mark. Wisp drifted past, little and content, and in the hush between a child's breath and sleep, the village heard a sound, somewhere between a thank you and a goodbye. It was not a coward's sigh, nor was it a triumphant roar. It was the kind of sound that ends a story and makes a bed warmer. If you, in some autumn night, place a small candle on a sill and ask for a sign that kindness can live in places others expect only fear, you may glimpse a pale thread of light drifting by, no bigger than a thought and no less brave. That is Wisp on his way. He will come if you need him. He will pass if he is not called. He will not make you jump or dread the dark. He will perhaps lift a mitten that fell in the snow or nudge the kettle to sing. And that, the villagers said into each child's ear when they told the tale at bedtime, is the part of a ghost story that keeps the world whole. The learning that the unseen can be a comfort. The knowing that bravery can wear gentleness like a cloak. And that is how Pip, the ghost who forgot to boo, found his courage, not in fright or thunder, but in the kindness that warms a lonely room. When the next Halloween moon rises over Willowmere Hollow, listen closely to the breeze. You may hear a faint little boo, not to scare you, but to remind you, sometimes being brave just means being kind. Thank you for listening to Magic Fairy Tales TV. If you enjoyed this gentle Halloween story, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for more magical tales every week. Your next story is waiting right here. Click on Cinderella, the Glass Wish, for another cozy, heartwarming Halloween adventure.